Alright, what's going on, guys? Today we're going to be doing a hypertrophy push day. So that's going to be chest, shoulders, and triceps. And the focus on this is going to be more of a bar kind of day as opposed to dumbbells or machines or other things like that. So to start off, I usually do some mobility work. So in this case, that's going to be scarecrows. And that is just going to be where you keep your elbows up and you hold some light dumbbells in your hands and just kind of tilt your hands forward, trying to keep it as small of a movement as you can so that just your shoulders kind of take over. We're just trying to work on our rotator cuff here and just kind of keeping it smooth and warming it all up, getting some blood flowing and getting the mobility in. And so for scarecrows, we usually do not want our elbows to pitch forward or backwards. We just kind of want to rotate from that axis here. So just as best you can, try to just keep them still and just push your hands forward and backwards. From here, what I like to do is usually just what's called huggers, and it's kind of a dynamic movement. You're kind of just giving yourself a hug, and you're pretty much just moving your shoulders, your pecs through kind of their horizontal range of motion here. From here, I kind of like to do a swimming motion, and for that, I like to just go maybe 4 or 5 strokes forward, 4 or 5 strokes backwards. Then I'll switch the arm just to kind of windmill my arm a little bit and get everything warmed up like it should. I'm looking into some more mobility stuff, so I hope to have some more good kind of dynamic exercises to do before you start. I just need to learn that in time, and I'm reading some books about it now, so I'll let you guys know. So for the bench, we're going to start with a pyramid. We're going to do 15, 12, 10, 8, and 8 reps, and on that last set we're going to make it a drop set. Before I start any bench motion, I like to retract my scapula, so in order to do that we're going to bring our shoulders up towards the ceiling, back towards the back wall, and then tuck them down as best you can. So try to emulate that as best you can while you're laying on the bench. Think almost standing at attention in the military. So for the bench, I want my forearms to kind of be perpendicular to the bar, and I want to make sure that as I'm going down, my arms are going to be straight up and down, if that makes sense. We don't want them to be too bent in or too bent out as we go. And as I'm trying to bench, I want to make sure that I'm bending the bar forward with my palms to kind of rotate my elbows forward. Otherwise, your elbows can have a tendency to flare out, and that can cause a little bit of impingement and pain in the shoulder, and you also have a little bit greater risk of hurting yourself as time goes on and the weight gets heavier. As I'm bringing it down, I'm trying to bring the bar to kind of my nipple line, so I don't want it to go too low to where it's at the bottom of my rib cage, but I don't want it to go too high to where it's a little bit closer to shoulder. I usually try to start with the bar kind of under my eye level, so after I've kind of anchored my shoulders, I like to just try to pull my hips back to kind of create a natural arch in the back and pulling my sternum up towards the sky. That way you can kind of push down through your heels and your hips and kind of give yourself some leg drive as you're moving through. Another thing I want to point out is I don't like to use clips on the bench, and this is just in case of risk. You just don't want to have the bar not be able to come up and then you not be able to bail out if need be. And I find that not using clips kind of helps me work on my balance a little bit more in terms of the bench. So immediately after that top set of 8, we're just going to strip the weight off, and I usually like to make my drop set the weight that I started with, just to kind of come full circle and see how many I can do at the end of the weight that I started with. So from here we're going to move on to a wider grip incline bench, and we're going to do a pyramid of 12, 10, and 8 reps, with that last set being a drop set. Some people call this a guillotine press. I think this is a little bit different, and for the sake of this kind of workout, I like to keep it a little bit wider, just so I can get a little bit bigger stretch in my chest. Usually if I'm doing a little bit more of a strength day, I'll do a normal incline bench, but for this one I like to just kind of focus on my form and get a nice little stretch as I come down and just try to push up with my chest versus my shoulders. So we want to bring that bar right below the collarbones, and I try to get my shoulders as best as I can from the start, but if you need to, you can kind of adjust after you pick it up. So I like to just kind of tuck them back the same way that I do with the flat bench, and I try to just make my grip as good as I can just by keeping my wrists up and just making sure I'm coming down as smooth as possible. And for incline, we do want a little bit of an arch, but not as much as a flat bench would be. We don't really want to turn this into like a fully pivoted motion, so that would kind of make it more of a flat bench actually than an incline, if that makes sense. We want to keep our torso in line with the bench even though we're doing a little arch. If we arch too much, it'll pivot it too much and then it'll turn into the wrong kind of movement. And same thing on the incline, I want to try to bend that bar forward so that my elbows kind of naturally draw forward. Otherwise it's easy to flare out. especially when you're doing wide. And also for incline bench, I don't like to grip it too hard. I like to just kind of keep it propped up in my hands as best I can, so that way my chest is doing most of the work of pushing the bar off of my chest, if that makes sense. And after that top set of 8, we're just going to drop it back down to our starting weight and just try to do as many reps as we can until failure. So moving on to the decline bench, we're going to do 3 sets of 10, and I actually learned to put this third from Wesley Vissers, and the reason being is because we've already done 2 chest exercises, so by that third movement you're going to be pretty fatigued. So that way I don't actually have to go super heavy on the decline. I can keep it a little bit lighter, but still kind of burn myself out once I get to that 10th rep. And to be honest, I'm not that great at decline bench, and I don't really like to go super heavy. So that's why I kind of do this third. That way I'm already a little bit fatigued in my chest and can just kind of burn out. Now this decline bench in particular at this gym does not adjust where your legs go. You just kind of have to fall in and figure it out. So I tried to just do the best that I could, but it is a little dodgy. And as I come down, I like to just hit the bottom of my sternum and just try to kind of hit that base of my rib cage as best I can in terms of bar placement. And I like to almost just think about scooping my elbows together as I come up at the top. And I find on the decline that I arch about equivalent to a flat bench, maybe a little bit more, because we really kind of want to pull our chest and our rib cage up towards the top of the ceiling here. From here we're going to move into a single arm shoulder press. We're going to do 3 sets of 8 to 12. So same with the incline bench here, I like to just barely hold on. That way my shoulder is what's kind of pushing me up. Otherwise I hold on too hard and I find that my arm kind of burns out before anything. Now for these, I also like to keep my back off of the pad until I can't do any more, and then I'll lean back as best I can. But I like to do this just to try to keep my core nice and tight and to keep my back sitting up straight. For this kind of movement, I like to think about just drawing a center line down the middle of my nose and just trying to bring that weight up towards that center line as best I can. So you're going to kind of go up and in versus just straight up, if that makes sense. The opposite hand that I'm pressing with, so the hand that's not pressing, I like to keep it down and just hovering right above my shoulder. I don't really like to keep them both up at the same time just because I don't feel like I can get as good of balance or range of motion. And the goal here is not going to be the full range of motion to the arms, the goal is the full range of motion for the shoulder. So we're not going to be fully extending that arm up, we're just going to be kind of fully extending the shoulder as best we can. So after that shoulder press, we're going to move into some incline cable flies. We're going to do 3 sets of 12 to 15 reps. So I like to keep this in high position. And for these, I don't really hold on. I just like to keep my hands open, so that way my chest, again, is kind of pulling me all the way through. I kind of find for any motion, I like to kind of minimize as much of my hand as I can. That way it's really the muscle doing the work and not my grip doing the work. And as I push forward, I like to shift the pressure to the pinky side of my hands. And that just kind of makes me transfer the pressure just the way I like it. I find that I get a good squeeze at the end, but then get a nice stretch in my chest as I come back up. And as I come back up, I'll kind of roll to the thumb side again. And I don't know if this is just me being dumb or if there's any merit to this, but I like to switch my feet halfway through my set. So the foot that's forward, once I get to that midway through the set, I'll just shift my feet so that the other foot is forward instead. Maybe I'm OCD, I'm not really sure. And I try to squeeze as best I can on the bottom and also keep my shoulders back during the entirety of the movement. That way my shoulders don't take over. They have a tendency to do that for a lot of chest stuff. I like to lean forward at my hip, so kind of leaning forward at the torso, and just kind of keeping everything else pulled back. So keeping my hips back, keeping my shoulders back, but just leaning forward at the torso. And I don't like to bring my hands back too far. If you feel your shoulders start to just unset themselves from the position that you kept them in the start, then you've gone a little bit too far. So again, I like to just think about going through the full range of motion for the chest, not necessarily for the exercise, if that makes sense. So after our flies, we're going to do lateral raises. We're just going to go for 3 sets of 15 and superset these with cable rear delt flies, 3 sets of 10 to 12. For the lateral raises, I barely try to hold them. I roll my shoulders back at first and just kind of set everything in place, same thing as everything else. We just want to bend the knees, get the hips back, get the shoulders back. And I like to think about kind of pouring a drink as I do these, so I like to keep my thumbs down the whole way through. I don't bring my hands above the shoulders or the elbows because I like to just make sure that I'm kind of just getting the shoulder through its full range of motion. Otherwise, if I bring them too high, my traps take over, unfortunately. So I just like to make sure that just those lateral delts are kind of just moving everything, and that nothing else is really taking over. Now, I heard this from Kai Green. You want to imagine that you're being filmed through this. So if I was to film you, every frame as you're going through, I want you to be in control. So try not to swing them, try not to let them just release or drop, try to just keep them in control the whole way through. So just think about that pressure kind of just being on your lateral delt the whole way through and not relaxing too much. So as I go through this motion, I like to think about just pulling out towards the side walls, not pulling up. Remember, we're going to be going up naturally through this motion, so we want to make sure that we're pulling out. That way, we can kind of maximize the amount of shoulder that's going to be involved through this. So for the cable flies, I like to keep my chest forward because we have a tendency to lean back. So I find that if I can kind of feel like I'm at equilibrium and just that I'm straight up, not too far forward or back, I find that my rear delts get the best kind of work. I try to sit up tall, keep my shoulders back, and think about just my elbows going back. My hands are just along for the ride, but I try to keep my arms relatively straight so that way my hands will still kind of move through the motion, but it's mostly just my elbows pulling my shoulders and hands back, if that makes sense. I try to pull straight back, but I also try to rotate around. So think about just kind of making a revolution with your arm around your body, not just pulling back towards the back wall. Getting that rotation motion is really what's going to make that rear delt kind of activate versus just our back. Think about kind of breaking this movement down into the tiniest muscles that you can. So those rear delts are going to be really small in comparison to our lats. So if we can think about just restricting the movement to just those rear delts as best we can work them optimally. Now with these setting up, I try to grab the opposite cables, but leave them separated when I start. So I'll grab with my left hand, I'll grab the right cable and vice versa. But then I'll pull them to where my hands are just resting naturally and my hands are not crossed to start. And as I go through here, I want to make sure that my hands and my arms are going to be kind of parallel with the floor. I don't want to kind of be pulling at an angle here. I want to make sure that everything is relatively flat as we go all the way through. So after this, we're going to do an underhand tricep press, 3 sets of 10. So for these, I like to keep my palms up about shoulder width apart. And I try to point my elbows towards the floor at all times. That way my shoulders don't round forward and take over too much in the motion. And otherwise we also have a tendency to pull our elbows back because we have a tendency to take the path of least resistance through here. So I try to just make sure shoulders are going to stay back, chest is going to be forward, elbows will stay pointing towards the floor the whole time. And the reason I lean forward is to try to keep my arms from hitting my knees when I go to full extension. When I stand up tall, I sometimes find that I hit my legs or my body is kind of positioned weird as I go down. So I find that leaning forward, I can get that full range of motion of the tricep without hitting myself. And I really try to think about almost like a double jointed person. I try to push my hands beyond the point that my elbows allow to really get that squeeze. So I really try to just push those hands down and tighten my elbow up as best I can. And I try not to let anything above my elbow really be what moves. So just kind of from elbow to wrist is what's going to be moving you through the whole position. So for our final movement, we're going to be going into overhead rope extensions. We're going to go for 3 sets of 10 to 12. So for these, I like to really kind of lunge forward. And as I extend out, I like to push my hands farther apart as I go. So as I go through this movement, I start with my hands relatively close together, but then I'll separate them as I push straight out. So I like to keep my head down, just kind of lean forward. And again, with this kind of tricep exercise, we don't want to move anything above the elbows. Keep the elbows pointing straight out, and just think elbow to wrist is going to be what's extending you. So just think about as you pull straight ahead, once you get to full extension, your hands should be pointing opposite each other and kind of just separated here. So that should wrap up all our exercises. I hope you guys enjoyed these, and I'm going to try to make a few more soon. I hopefully will have more free time in the near future that I can make more of these and hopefully, I don't know, speak a little bit better. I sometimes find that I get a little bit disjointed in my thoughts as I read through these. So I hope you're able to understand everything pretty clearly and make sense of it all. And other than that, enjoy and good luck.